My cheating wife never expected me to retaliate against her for cheating on me. I exposed her secret and she lost everything. As it turns out, my wife was having an affair with Ralph the truck driver. The way I learnt about it was that his wife Janice told me about it and how Janice knew about it. Ralph had inadvertently revealed the affair to her and Janice had no idea that Ralph drove a truck locally and came home every night. He and Jenna shared a laptop and mobile phone after work. They ate dinner together and then Ralph spent hours playing games and surfing the internet on his laptop. Janice Joyce jigsaw puzzles, but rarely, as Ralph hogs the computer. A friend suggested she get an iPad, so they added it to Ralph's account. They seem to have a good relationship and are happy with their work, home life and weekly intimacy. One night, Ralph is on his laptop and Janice is on her iPad. Janice discovers text messages on her iPad showing that Ralph is having an affair with another woman. Shocked, she confronted Ralph, who lied and said he was sending scheduling texts. Later, Janice sees Ralph texting his lover about almost getting caught. She cries herself to sleep then sleeps on the couch all night until morning. She decided to find out about the woman before she took action. A week later, Janice found out the woman's name, Gloria, a waitress at the truck stop where Ralph had breakfast the next day. Janice went to that truck stop and found Gloria and asked her what her last name was and she replied that it wasn't Johnson, it was Morris. Janice said, "I'm sorry, I must have the wrong person." Janice rushed home, logged into Facebook, and found Gloria Morris. She found out that Gloria was married to Paul Morris. Janice accessed my social media profiles, found out where I worked, and called me. "This is Paul Morris." I replied, "Mr. Morris, this is Janice Godwin, we need to talk." She said eagerly, "Why? What is it?" I asked, "I can't discuss it over the phone, but it concerns your wife." Janice replied, "Can you elaborate?" I asked, "I would prefer to talk to you in person anytime, anywhere." Janice insisted, "I won't unless I know what it is, I won't commit to a meeting." I responded firmly, a short silence if nothing else. "My husband and your wife are having an affair." Janice blurted out, "I'm sorry, I'm taken aback." "Yes, they're having an affair," Janice repeated. "You're sure you're talking to the right person?" I asked skeptically. "I'm Janice." Confirming. "In that case, perhaps we should meet," I suggested. I immediately invited her to my office. She came. Janice showed me the text messages between Gloria and her husband. Initially there was no indication of Gloria's last name. I was skeptical, but when the text messages mentioned Gloria's place of work it caught my attention. Some of the more recent texts even mocked Janice and I for not knowing about it. Janice and I discussed our next steps, leaning towards divorce, but first wanting something in return, not revenge for the intimacy, but psychological. Their affair was purely physical. If this had been love, the damage would have been greater and the situation would have been different. We felt that we must have done something wrong to make our spouses do what they did. We decided to wait a couple of days, keep a facade of calm while we tracked their movements via Janice's iPad. Their meetings were random, always at the same motel, and the next day, Janice told me that Ralph was meeting Gloria at 2 p.m. We went to the motel, waited for Gloria to arrive, and booked a room, and Janice and I gave each other a warm kiss, making sure Gloria noticed as she tried to hide her face. When we got home I took a rare afternoon shower. Gloria walked in soon after, obviously understanding what was going on, and seeing me with Janice had put her in a bad mood. She awkwardly inquired as to how my day was going, trying to make small talk. I smiled. "Oh, nothing much, took a few hours off work to meet a friend." "Oh, who is it?" "Just someone you don't know." "Why didn't you tell me you were taking time off? We could have done something together." "I didn't think you'd be interested, you seem to have other things on your mind lately." "Why do you say that?" "Just a hunch." She stuck to me. That night she made dinner on purpose, and when she was done she sat me down on the couch next to her instead of my recliner. She leaned over me. She began to touch me intimately, but I gently moved away from her and announced that I was going to bed. "Great," she replied, "that's the way it is." "Not tonight." I was determined to said. I pretended to be asleep when Gloria went to bed. I went to bed and moved away wearily when she touched my back. I was a heavy sleeper. Janice and her husband had a similar experience and reacted in the same way. 3 days later, Gloria and Ralph met again at the motel. Thanks to Janice's iPad, we knew and repeated our stunt. This time Ralph saw us. The same embarrassing incident played out in our home. Gloria again questioned me about my afternoon shower and I offered a weak excuse. Text messages that night showed their affair losing its appeal. They blamed each other. Gloria claimed she loved me and not Ralph, while Ralph insisted he loved Janice. They speculated about how Janice and I had met because our personalities were so different. After another 2 weeks, we continued to thwart their attempts at intimacy, eventually frustrating them so much that they decided to end the affair and focus on their marriage. But Janice and I had long since decided to end our marriage. On the day they ended their affair, they were served with divorce papers. When Gloria and I were home, she tried to talk to me, but I ignored her until the doorbell rang. It rang and she answered the phone and got the divorce papers and then turned around and asked me what this was. She asked, "Do you know what this is? I'm divorcing you for adultery." "You can't do that, I've already done that, but you've been in the middle of me and Godwin dating." "I didn't do anything with Janice, we just knew each other, so you saw us together and thought we were having an affair, but we never were. You and he though you were seeing each other at every chance to meet, but the motel records show you two met at least once a week for the past 6 months. How did you find out we were so careful?" I chuckled. Everyone at the truck stopped knew about you too. You can't keep secrets like that from people who love to gossip, especially your fellow waitresses. I hinted that one of her co-workers spilled the beans I didn't know about. I didn't reveal how we really found out. We might need it later. She sat down on the couch. "Can we talk about this?" She just divorce papers. You can say whatever you want, justify it however you want. Defend yourself all you want, but none of that changes the fact that you cheated on me, and that's why I'm divorcing you. Paul, that's nothing. It's just for fun. You cheated on me with another man for fun. Isn't that fun enough with me? It's only going to make things worse. Thanks for the reminder, Gloria. It really makes me feel better. I said sarcastically, "Of course I didn't mean that. What can you say? This is only the second worst move you've ever made. You'd better get a lawyer. I'll see you in court, but before that, we need to sort out the property. I've cancelled my credit cards and split the money in the accounts. You can still use the old ones. I've got new ones and the investments are the same. Your phone was supposed to stop an hour ago. The house is yours, so I'm gone. I'm moving all my stuff to Tony's." I put the house keys and the garage remote on the table and walked out. Her last plea echoed behind me. Paul, please, I'm sorry. Tony was my best friend. He and his wife Sophia owned the best pizza place and bar in town. I was the godfather to their 2-year-old daughter, Diana. When I arrived, my room was ready. There was no happiness to be had. We just moved my stuff into the house or the garage before dinner. My first night here felt strange. Gloria and I had been married for 4 years and had lived together for another year before that. Over the years we hadn't slept in the same bed more than a dozen times. I almost didn't go to sleep until the next morning. The next workday seemed eternally long, that the following week felt even longer. Gloria got her own mobile phone and started calling me. Calling 6 times trying to talk to me. I blocked her number. Janice was facing the same problem with Ralph, who kept calling and asking for forgiveness while she read Ralph's messages to Gloria, who was trying to move in with her. Janice kept refusing, convinced that I would come back to her. She believed that I would listen to her at our first meeting with the lawyers. At that meeting, she was wrong. She insisted on a private conversation, but I refused. Finally, I walked away and let the court handle everything. I told my attorney that I would not talk to her. 3 months after serving her with divorce papers, we went to court. The divorce was handled like most divorces. Property was divided equally, except for her house, which she kept and everything in it. Adultery was not contested and I did not pay alimony after the divorce. Janice Godwin divorced Ralph for adultery and was awarded the house as alimony. She and I went to dinner that night and updated me on their lack of communication. Ralph began dating another waitress at a truck stop. 2 months later, my divorce was official, but by the time I heard the judge pronounce it, I already felt divorced. I considered dating, but focused on work and spending time with my goddaughter, Diana. Feeling like I had stayed in Tony and Sophia's relationship, I started looking for a place of my own. I found a flat and bought some second-hand furniture from a charity shop. The cashier joked about trying to recruit me as a volunteer, and I joked that the furniture would be delivered the same day, but I would have to sleep on the sofa until a bed was delivered from the mattress shop. Months went by and I considered a sea cruise for single men, but ultimately decided against it because it was more suited to middle-aged men who needed another dresser. I went back to the used furniture shop, same cashier. The cashier didn't know me, but I joked, "Are you still looking for volunteers?" Yes, we are recruiting, would you be interested?" She asked. "It depends on what I am willing to volunteer for." I replied that we need all kinds of help. "Do you know how to drive a truck?" I certainly didn't want to hear that, considering my recent beef with Ralph Godwin. I replied firmly that absolutely not. Then I turned to leave and she called out to me. Her voice caught my attention, so I turned back to her and I inquired what kind of work she did, to which she replied, "You could operate the cash register like I do, or help unload the trucks, no driving required." She was quick to add that there was work in the sorting room at the back, which required lifting and sweeping. "You just need to be willing to help others." Who should I talk to about this? I asked her and she smiled warmly. "The office is in the back and they will sign you up for it and they don't know why." I went back to the office and sitting at the desk was a woman who looked to be about 90 years old. She asked me if I needed help and I learnt that she was the shop manager's secretary. "I heard you were looking for volunteers." Her face immediately lit up when I mentioned her. I didn't know that before. I had spoken to Arch, the shop manager, whom I didn't like very much, and planned to help load and unload the trucks because I could only commit to Saturdays, which they arranged for me. We have 2 trucks and whenever someone calls in a large furniture or appliance donation we're in charge of the pickup. I followed to help load and unload. It wasn't until the 3rd Saturday that I met the lady who recruited me again. She came out to check out what we had collected. Even when I introduced myself again, she didn't recognize me. I realized that she had only met me twice, so I shouldn't expect her to remember me either. She greeted the driver and then introduced herself to me. "Everyone calls me Susie," she said, as we shook hands. "Hello, I'm Paul Morris. We've met before." I reminded her that we'd met when she asked twice in front of you till it was you who invited me to volunteer. "Oh yes, I remember now." She said that although I knew she didn't, she was only being kind. "What do you think of that? It's kept me busy so far." I replied that over the next I saw Susie twice more over the course of a month, exchanging smiles and greetings each time. 2 months later I went out on a date with a woman I'd met at the laundromat. We had drinks and dinner, but there was no romantic spark, so we didn't go out again. Once, Joseph and I went to pick up furniture in an upscale area and the homeowners were decorating and their daughter was helping. She bumped into me, blamed me, and asked me to leave. Joseph suggested we unload the furniture and leave it there. The homeowners apologized for their daughter's behavior, but Joseph insisted we deserved better and didn't need their furniture. We unloaded the furniture and put it back in the shop and Arch, the manager, told us our services were no longer required. Joseph and I went to lunch and after a few beers I received a voicemail from Susie Blake apologizing for the incident and informing me that the general manager wanted to meet with me on Monday. I decided not to respond because I had work to do and didn't need to be doing unpaid volunteer work at about the same time. I started looking for a house to buy. I informed me that the homeowner had apologized for her daughter's behavior and was still willing to donate furniture, that she was going to hire movers to take care of the matter and that she planned to donate generously. Susan wanted me to return on Saturday, which I politely declined, explaining that it was out of character for me. Susan expressed regret, but then understood. Cynthia Roman, managing director of United Industries, called to discuss the matter and did not force me to return. I arranged to meet with her after hours. I liked Cynthia. She explained the company's strategy, emphasizing their reliance on donations and the impact of losing them on their mission to support children with learning disabilities. She clarified that the organization is not for profit and consists mainly of unpaid volunteers. The furniture we left behind would have funded 2 terms of tutoring for 4 children. Fortunately, the homeowner didn't blame us, and Joseph admitted that he was the one who offered to leave the furniture behind. A month later, I was back in the truck with Joseph, who admitted he may have overreacted. "Cynthia found me, Mr. Morris, do you have a moment?" she asked. I said yes and walked to the truck. "Can I ask you a personal question?" she asked. "Sure." "Are you married?" I laughed and said, "Well, anyway, I still have to apologize for Ralph's behavior." 3 weeks after that meeting, I completed the purchase of a new house and Cynthia and I went on a first date, and 2 months later, after she described her brother as unpleasant, we started a second date. Cynthia Roman and I became intimate, not just normal intimate, but intimate with passion and ardor that left us both completely consumed with desire. Her body was impeccable, but more importantly, her passion and heart were completely aligned. I never believed in nymphomania until I met Cynthia. Though her public persona didn't hint at her private desires, she had an insatiable hunger for intimacy. Her mind and body always seemed to be ready for pleasure until her body couldn't go on. I often wondered what would have happened if another man had been present. After about 6 months, I couldn't keep up with her. We were very happy together. One Saturday, Joseph and I hadn't arranged a pickup. I decided to truck, and as I was packing up in the back of the building, I heard a man's voice, "You're in trouble, you bastard." I turned around and saw Ralph Godwin standing there. "Why do you say that?" I asked. "Did you screw my sister?" "I'm not screwing your sister. We're dating." "You're only dating her to get back at me." "You're wrong. We're together because we genuinely like each other, or at least neither of us are married." "I warned you to stay away from her, and I warned you to stay away from me," I replied. I turned to go back to my car to continue my work, and noticed that someone had quickly retracted their head back into the building, suggesting that they'd been listening in on our conversation. I glanced over my shoulder, but Ralph was already gone. 15 minutes later, Cynthia called me to ask me if it were true, or was my brother really there. "He was there and you talked to him. What did I do? What did you tell him?" Cynthia asked him. "He accused me of dating you to get back at him. I told him that we were together because we genuinely liked each other, or something like that." "Are you sure it wasn't the other way around? You didn't say you were only dating me to spite him." "No," he said, "I didn't." "Someone overhears what you say, and either they misheard you or they lied. I've known him a long time, and he's never lied to me before." "Does that mean I automatically lied?" There was a pause. "I don't want to see you again, and we don't need your services anymore." "Wait, Cynthia, but she's gone." I went in to look for her, but she wasn't there. Behind the counter was Susie. "Who's working today?" I asked her. "Thomas and Archie. Why aren't they in?" "Arch went to lunch a few minutes ago. Thomas went out. They went on an errand." I put the cleaning supplies in the truck and went home. I tried to call Cynthia, but my number was blocked. I don't like Arch. He can't be trusted and everyone hates him except Cynthia. He's the shop manager and the only employee besides Cynthia who gets paid. His secretary is the other one. They were the only full-time employees. Everyone else was just volunteers who only worked a few hours a week. After a few days, I gave up trying to contact Cynthia. A few weeks later, I ran into her while grocery shopping. She told me that she was now the temporary shop manager because Arch had been fired. Cynthia overheard him on the phone admitting that you got him fired. She confronted him and he admitted the truth about talking to your brother. She explained. I retold her the whole story, starting with my ex-wife until Cynthia told me that she didn't want to ever see me again. "Wow, what a coincidence," Susie said. "Yes. It's all in the past now." We talked for a little while longer. We talked for a while and then she left. Another month went by and I decided to buy some new furniture for my house. I rang Susie and asked her if she could send someone to collect the furniture I wanted to donate. She said they had a truck and driver, but no one to help load and unload. I offered to help, so they sent Joseph with the truck. We loaded everything on the truck and I followed him to the shop where we unloaded and moved the furniture into the shop. Joseph and I got to talking and Cynthia noticed us and came over. She asked me, "Can I talk to you?" Joseph excused himself. I stayed silent. "I made 2 mistakes and I'm sorry." She started the first and biggest mistake, which was believing Archie over you. The second mistake was not going to you right away when I found out he was lying. I was embarrassed and ashamed and I didn't know how to apologize. We looked at each other briefly, but we had to separate when the cashier called Cynthia for help. "Couldn't someone else handle it?" Cynthia asked. "No ma'am, we need you." The cashier reluctantly replied. Cynthia apologized and left to go to the cashier's desk. I was lost in thought, unsure of what to say or do next. Do I want to be alone, lonely, waiting for her to forgive me? "She's back, Paul. I'm sorry but it's an emergency, we had an accident with our truck. Can I call you back later?" I nodded and she hurried off. 3 hours later she called me and asked me if everything was okay. I asked her. Yes, a new driver had backed into a wall, there was no serious damage and no one was hurt. She assured me. After a pause she continued, "Let's talk, shall we, Paul? Why don't you come round to my place and we'll have a bite to eat?" I offered to be there in 20 minutes. I got cold cuts, cheese bread and 2 beers out of the fridge. We made sandwiches and ate them in silence. Afterwards we took the beers to the couch and she leaned over me. We kissed for the first time and had a passionate night until the early morning. We were so passionate every night for the next 4 months. Life was almost perfect. Cynthia and I discussed moving in together, the possibility of her moving in with me, and then her dear friend Jonah came back from Alaska and they resumed having dinner together, gradually alienating Cynthia and me until our relationship faded without any explicit discussion. One Saturday, I saw Joseph at the gas station and talked to him. He mentioned that Cynthia was pregnant and that her son was back in Alaska. I realized that I no longer cared and that I had moved on. Joseph also mentioned that Susie mentioned me occasionally and turned down the shop manager position because she didn't want to be in time while grocery shopping. One day I felt a tap on my shoulder and turned to see a very pregnant Cynthia. "Hello, stranger," she greeted me. "Hello," I replied. We looked at each other for a moment. "You've put on some weight," I remarked. She blushed slightly before responding, "Yeah, I guess I have." There was a powwow. "Have you been? Not too bad. And you?" I asked. The same. The silence between us felt awkward. "Well, it was good seeing you again," I said, starting to push my cart away. Paul, would you like to have dinner together sometime?" she asked tentatively. I glanced down at her stomach and said no. "I'm worried another old friend will turn up out of the blue and invite you to join them for dinner and that wouldn't be good." "Paul and I are sorry," she admitted. "Besides," I added, "what would Jonah say?" "I don't know, I haven't seen him in months. Does he know you're pregnant?" He knew before he went back to Alaska." "That's too bad." "Sure, it's good to see you again, and maybe I left her without hearing what she had to say, and after a few months, I'd see the occasional truck in town, but never Joseph, Cynthia or Suey." One day my boss announced his immediate retirement. He didn't elaborate, but we later learnt that it was because his wife was ill and he wanted to spend time with her. His successor, Frederick Johnson, introduced himself to us and I had heard of him but never met him. Frederick invited his senior and mid-level staff to a picnic at his house the following Saturday afternoon. As I drove up the driveway, his house looked familiar. I was chatting with a colleague and had just finished a drink when a young woman about my age approached us. "Hello, I'm Christine Johansson. Frederick Johansson's daughter." She introduces herself, shakes my colleague's hand, and then shakes mine. She asked, "Have we met?" I replied and made my excuses to sit down, finish my drink and get ready to leave. Before I got very far I heard her speak again. "I remember now, you're the one who caused me to trip." I turned back to her and said, I didn't cause you to trip, you weren't looking at the road and you didn't know where you were going, and to say that I tripped you is nonsense." I ignored her words and left straight away, heading straight for the office. I wanted to clean out my desk and take what I needed before security kicked me out on Monday. On Monday morning, I went to work as usual, only to be told that Mr. Johnson wanted to see me. I went to his office and he called me in right away. "You left before you had a chance to eat, and then this morning I saw on the security camera that you had come in on Saturday." He smiled and said, "Didn't your daughter tell you?" I asked, "But I wanted to hear your side of the story." "It's very simple. A few months ago when I went to your house to pick up your old donated furniture, your daughter tripped and she accused me of tripping her. I thought I'd be fired once you knew who I was, so I came in and took all my personal belongings." Frederick Johansson suddenly burst out laughing, stood up, and shook my hand across the table. "Paul, I've heard the story about the clumsy bloke who tried to take my daughter, and it gets funnier every time she tells it." I shook his hand when she said, having been to the party, "You don't look anything like the ogre she described." He leaned back in his chair, sat down. Frederick and I talked for over an hour, mostly about the company and his plans, but we also discussed his daughter. "My wife saw everything and agrees with you that it was Chris's fault, but she spent her life trying to blame everything on someone else. Tell me, why do you work for them? Don't we pay you enough?" "Me caller, I never seem to get paid enough, but it's all volunteer work and I only do it on Saturdays." Good, I wish more people would volunteer." "Are you still doing it?" he asked, and I told him about my time there. He laughed again. "You're a smart guy or you wouldn't be where you are today. Maybe you know that the charities that you volunteer for pay tutors to help kids with learning problems, but they also need unpaid volunteers to handle the office work and organize the tutors' time. I would like to open an administrative office here and become a corporate sponsor. Would you consider organizing this office? This is not volunteering, it is part of your daily routine. You are busy now, but this would make you even busier. What do you think?" "I need some time to think about it." I replied, "Please take all the time you need and let me know by next Monday." As I left his office, someone leaned over his secretary's desk. She straightens up, bumps into me, and our eyes meet, an irritated gleam in hers. "You're the clumsiest person I've ever met," she blurted out. I countered, "Maybe if you'd watch where you're going instead of charging around like a bull in a china shop." "A bull in a china shop, what the hell kind of expression is that?" She said back, "It means reckless." "You seem to be familiar with the word, maybe you should consider getting a guide dog to help you navigate. They're smart enough to pay attention to where they're going." I snorted, hearing a chuckle from behind me. I turned to see Frederick Johansson standing in the doorway of his office, calling me Paul. "Let's get started." He said that while I was away, the rest of the week had kept me too busy to think about his proposal. I thought that accepting it might win him over as it was a favorite of his, but doing it for that reason wasn't right for me. It wasn't right for me. Monday morning I found myself outside his office, still undecided until I confronted him with the answer. I walked over to his desk and stood in front of him. "Paul, are we going ahead with this project?" he asked. "Yes, sir, we will," I answered firmly, and at that moment I made my decision. "Good for you." He nodded approvingly. "Oh shit." I heard my dad's voice from behind me. I turned to look at her and asked what she meant. "Both of you sit down," Mr. Johansson instructed firmly. Reluctantly we sat down and glared at each other. Chris had been dealing with this for a while and knew what was needed. Paul wants to help, so I suggest that you two settle your differences and come up with a plan to help these kids. Have I made myself clear enough?" he said, looking sternly at each of us. Ed wanted to protest, but he knew how to convince me. "This isn't about pride, Paul, this is about helping kids who need to succeed." He emphasized that. "Yes, sir, I'm fine now. Transfer as much of your workload as you can to Thompson. Transfer as much work as you can. I've talked to him and he's ready to go. After that, spend some time with Chris, find out what she needs from you. Yes, sir. Yes, Dad. We slipped out of his office at the same time and stood in silence in the reception area. Finally, I break the silence. Where should we set up the conference room? I thought I'd bring some paperwork to give you an idea of our process. Okay, I'll see you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. No problem. She leaves, nearly trips over the carpet, and keeps quiet before throwing me a warning glance. The next day, she carts in a few boxes of paperwork, which we place in the conference room and work on throughout the morning. We split for lunch and then continued working into the afternoon. At the end of the day, she confirmed that she would be back the next morning to continue her work. I remind her that I have other responsibilities and will let her know when I have more time to focus on the counseling project later in the week. On Thursday, I called and she was free the next day and we continued our pattern of 2 days a week of peaceful coexistence. The following week she offered to meet with one of our funding sources and I agreed. She set up a lunch meeting and to my surprise, Cynthia showed up at the restaurant, obviously pregnant. I had completely forgotten about her. Chris introduced her to us and Cynthia reminded us that we were already old friends. Paul was the one who left the furniture in your driveway, if you remember. She adds, "Oh, I remember, I just forgot it was your company." I leaned back as they discussed budgets, goals, mentors, and other things, and when they were done, we were ready to leave. Cynthia asked me if I had seen Susie and I replied, "Not really, she was dating a very nice man." Cynthia said that was great. After that, we chatted for a while. Chris and I got in the car and went back to the office. Chris suddenly asked me, "Is that your baby?" I glanced at her. "What makes you think that I know you used to date her? So I wonder how you know that I noticed she was looking at you. What does that mean?" "It means she still wants you, but it's never going to happen." "What did she do to upset you?" "It's none of your business. She'll probably tell me herself." "Let her talk." There was a long silence. "Did she mention that Susie worked in her shop?" "Yes." "Did you have one with her too? Were you jealous?" "Huh, jealous? No way. Susie and I are just friends," and then there's a pause before Chris asks, "I don't see a ring, are you married?" "No." "Have you ever been married?" "Yes, or no?" "Why did you get divorced?" "She cheated on me." We were silent on the way to the office. Things changed after that. We were working well together, but it got better. She paid more attention to me and liked most of my ideas, and I found myself enjoying being with her. Eventually, I couldn't do both jobs at the same time and talked to my boss. He said to focus on Chris and he would handle my other tasks. He reckoned it would take a few more weeks for me to get used to the workload of a few hours a week. Chris and I started hanging out together. We went out to dinner, danced, hung out at the piano bar, basically did everything except get intimate. I tried a couple of times, but she made it clear that it wasn't going to happen. Nonetheless, we still had a great time together until things changed. After completing the planning stage of the project, we discussed the fact that we only needed one person to run it. Now, shortly after Chris left the conference room, her father called me into his office, so I went, and as I entered his reception area to give him an update, I overheard Chris say that he must lack real social skills or he wouldn't have lost the 2 women. Chris said that really it was Mr. Johansson's secretary. I tried to boost his self-esteem. Chris went on to say that HEK was actually a nice guy. Yes, very sweet. Chris added that HEK was funny, intelligent, pleasant, just needed a bit of work. The secretary asked. Chris laughed. Yes, he needed a bit of work. When I walked in, I knew they were talking about me because they looked up as I entered. I was glad my pride wasn't hurt. I said, "I feel sorry for that poor guy you guys are talking about." For a moment I thought it might have been me, but then I realized that if you, Chris, needed a bit of work, you'd surely tell me. "Well, Paul, I'm sorry." Chris started thanking on behalf of men everywhere for helping that guy. I continued, if he knew what you did for him he would thank you. I looked straight at Chris for caring about him too much. You don't have to stay with me anymore, you can focus on him. Chris tripped over her words and blushed. I'm here to update you on your father's condition. I finally broke the awkward silence and walked into his office with her close behind. She followed closely. Hey, it's good to see you both here, he greeted us. How about an update? Before she could say anything, I jumped in. We've reached the point where we only need one of us to handle it, and since Kristen has a lot of experience, I think she should be the one to handle it. I can go back to doing my job, do you agree, Chris? He asked. She glanced at me, then replied. Maybe I wasn't looking at her, but I could feel her eyes on me, and I saw his gaze dart between us. He didn't get where he is by being stupid. Well, you both have the rest of the day off. I'll think about it and get back to you on Monday. Chris, can you stay? Paul, have a good weekend. Thanks. I was out of the building in less than 5 minutes. I could have stayed cooped up all weekend, but I didn't. My best friend Tony and his wife Sophia were going out of town and asked if I could help watch my goddaughter Diana. I gladly accepted, packed an overnight bag and went to their house. It was a delightful weekend. I did everything a godparent is supposed to do. Spoilt Diana and then sent her back to her parents. We did her favorite things and I didn't get home until her parents got back on Sunday night. Christine tried to call me several times on Friday afternoon and evening, a few more times on Saturday and twice on Sunday. I wasn't in a hurry to get to work on Monday, but I didn't want to avoid the conflict either. As usual, I went to the office to tidy up the weekend's clutter, then went to the conference room where she was already working, so I turned around and went back to the office, and just before the end of the shift I was called into her father's office where she was already. Well, I had made my decision and he started to say, Chris, you're coming in to lead, Paul, you're basically go back to your regular duties, but I want you to assist Chris as needed, and also I want you to help recruit more mentors and find more kids that need our help. There's a lot of them out there. Let's find them and bring them together. And we endorsed his decision and went back to the conference room in silence. And once I started to complete my tasks in the conference room and update Kristen on my progress, she nodded her head, but when I'm done she stays silent. I walk towards the door to leave. Paul, she calls out to me. I stop and turn to face her. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it like that. I stare at her. No interpersonal skills. Kristen, do you know how heartbreaking it is to hear that? I was only with me out of pity. I shook my head. Others may have hurt me, but you broke me completely. Tears welled up in her eyes and she began to sob before I could walk away. I spent the next week in the office catching up on work and trying to avoid seeing Kristen. This pattern went on for a whole month. I was fully engaged in my work, oblivious to everything else, and then Mr. Johansson called me into. Paul, I have a situation to tell you about, but first I want to commend you on a promising partnership with Chris that many children will benefit from. Thank you. I'm in the process of planning the next phase and may need your input or even your help. Thank you. I'll respond to my situation now. Robbie Singler resigned today, leaving an opening in the planning department. The job requires an MBA degree, which you don't have, but on the one hand you have the talent, knowledge and leadership skills. On the other hand, promoting you might be seen as favoritism because you've worked for me, and the rumors about you and my daughter, which I've heard about, and which a few of my colleagues have even referred to openly, and which I've dismissed without bothering to respond to, so I'm caught in a dilemma, and you know it, as well as I do. There's nothing between you and her, but rumors are hard to dispel, no matter how much evidence there is to the contrary. Mr. Johansson came over from Barnes & Company, a rival company, and even though he was their CEO at the time, they attempted to recruit me. Just 2 weeks prior to our meeting I received an offer from them. Let me ask you a hypothetical question. I proposed to Barnes & Company that I be offered the position of planning division manager, the position we're discussing now. You had other qualified candidates. Why didn't I accept Barnes' offer? It would solve some problems. No, Barnes & Company won't get a better result, so it's not an option unless you just resign, which I hope you won't. We sat in silence for a while. What the hell happened between you two? I thought everything was going well. I smiled. We didn't get along at first, but then we got along fine. What really happened? She doesn't want to talk about it. It doesn't matter what you say now. It's over. All right, forget it. You're now the new program department manager, effective immediately. You'll be the youngest department manager in company history. Human Resources will discuss your new salary and benefits. You move into Singh's old office, the only corner office on the 7th floor. I think you'll like it. You can keep his secretary or get one of your own. Let maintenance know if you want any changes. Thank you. It's been a pleasure, and don't thank me yet. You'll be busy from now on. And, by the way, the department manager and his spouse or guest are invited to dinner at my house Friday night at 6:30. Please come to my house for dinner. At 6:30 p.m., formal attire is required. I'll be there but no spouses or guests. He's right. I arrive at his house at 6:15 p.m. and am ushered into the living room. I take the drinks they offer and talk to the other guests. As I glance around the dining room, I notice that each seat has a name tag. The tag next to me says Kristen Johansson. As I stare at it, I feel someone approach. It's my mother, who insisted on a formal. The dinner was arranged with separate seating for men and women. So here I am. Sorry if I'm reticent, she said. We didn't talk while the appetizers were being served, but by the time we got to the salad course, I began to make small talk, breaking the ice a couple of times. I found myself appreciating her charm in a way I'd never noticed before. After dessert she excused herself and I didn't see her all night after that. My first month at my new job wasn't as tough as expected and I began to relax. One morning my secretary told me that Kristen Johansson had called for an appointment. I said the appointment was tomorrow morning but wasn't sure if she really needed an appointment or if in her position she could just come over. I think a rumor may have reached the secretary. What do you mean by in her capacity? I asked her and she didn't imply anything else. I wondered if being the daughter of the CEO gave her special opportunities. I grinned. Do you think it should? She smiled back and then affirmed, me too. I let her know she could come over any time and I would see her when I could. She smiled, and the next morning back to her desk. Christine arrived on time and I stood up and greeted her, said good morning, gestured for her to sit down and then asked, what can I do for you? Do you remember Cynthia from the charity shop? Of course I remember. Do you think I'm the father of her child? She blushes. I didn't think. I was just wondering if you were. What happened to her? She wants to organize a barbecue party for some important partners and has invited us both. I don't know if you are free. I was just about to reply but she interrupted me. Paul, please don't say things like that. I won't be embarrassed by your lack of social skills. You know I won't be. I regret saying those things. I didn't mean them then and I don't mean them now. I don't know why I said them but I wish I hadn't. I was just trying to impress Dad's secretary but I did say them and I apologize. I looked at her. She fought back tears. I asked her about the date. I checked the calendar. I'm free that day. I promise. She seemed like she was going to say something else but changed her mind. The day of the barbecue arrived. I was there. Joseph was grilling. Cynthia and Susie were hosting. Kristen showed up. Susie held hands with us, introduced us to the other partners, praised our contribution to the project. Kristen knew most of the guests. I thought I could slip away. I went over to Joseph by the grill and we chatted for a while and had a few beers until Susie joined us. She asked, how have you been? I replied, good, and you? She replied, not too bad. We continued to chat until Kristen joined us. She asked, can I get you anything else? I said, no, thanks. I've had enough and I'm ready to go home. I finished my beer, threw the bottle away, shook Joseph's hand, said goodbye to Susie and Kristen, and started to leave. I was almost to my car when Kristen grabbed my arm and said, we need to talk. She said, we don't have anything to talk about. No, we do. I apologize for what I said. It wasn't true and I regret saying those things. Well, I accept your apology. Now we have nothing to talk about. I walked away before she could say anything. It was one thing to sit next to her at dinner and see her beauty, but I couldn't get his words out of my head. he must not have any social skills or he wouldn't have lost 3 women. I felt sorry for him, so I took my time to boost his self-esteem. Those words lingered in my mind and I felt they would be there for a long time. For 3 months I avoided any interaction with her. My office was on the same floor as her father's, but at opposite ends of the building. I was told she had an office on the 5th floor where the accounting office was, so we rarely met. Once, I was alone and took the lift downstairs. It stopped on the 5th floor, the door opened and I saw her standing there. She saw me and hesitated. She said, "Let me take the next one." I held out my hand and opened the door. She said, "This is ridiculous, come on in." She reluctantly stepped into the lift and we made our way in silence to the garage level where we each had our own private parking spaces. Mine had my name on it and hers said, "Reserved." The silence continued as we each walked to our cars. Another month later, I was in my office when my secretary brought in 2 police officers. She had a big smile on her face and a big grin on her face. "Mr. Morris, you need to come with us," one of the officers said. I was shocked as to why anyone would issue a warrant for a homeschooling project and you have to stay in custody until you pay bail. It turned out to be a scam to raise money for the homeschooling project, and they raised the bail money through donations from family and friends. I wasn't allowed to pay my own bail. I laughed and went with them. They took me to a retail shop and sat me in a roped-off area with the other arrestees. The deputy mayor and a popular local TV personality were already there. The TV personality was on the air, promoting the fundraiser, and started interviewing me, asking me who arrested me. "I wasn't quite sure," she said, putting the microphone to my face. "Now's your chance to appeal to your family and friends for donations that will get you out of here." I smiled, took the microphone, looked at the camera and appealed to all who were watching to help me bail out. They didn't tell me how much money I needed to raise, but in the jail area we were in, food, drinks and comfy chairs were readily available, and every 15 minutes someone would come by and tell us the amount that had been raised in our name. I had a great time, especially with Julie, the TV anchorwoman, who was on air every 15 minutes to raise money for bail money. A few hours later, Susie walked by, saw me and suddenly burst out laughing. She asked me who arrested you, and I had no idea. She stayed and chatted with us for a few minutes and shortly after that I heard the BFF announcer say, "You're free to go, Mr. Morris." Julie handed me her card with her mobile number on it. "Call me and we'll talk about the time we spent together." I grinned and walked out. The arresting officer took me back to my office. I had my own private entrance, so my secretary must have found out when I told her I was back. I usually walk out to get coffee, and when I opened the door I overheard her talking, and when they came to take him away he kept laughing and wondering who had arrested him. Of course I wouldn't tell him it was you, he'd screw us both. "No, I haven't heard from him." "When did you bail him out?" "Oh, you did bail him out." Then she laughed. "No, I haven't seen him, but I don't think he'd approve." "Well, good luck and let me know the outcome." She hangs up and starts working, but glances over and sees me. "Oh, you're back." I smiled to make sure I was back, then turned and walked into my office. I'm barely sitting down when Shirley comes in and stands by my desk. "How did things go?" she asked. "Not too bad actually, almost pleasant," I replied. She grinned. "Kristen told me that she was going to have you arrested for the charity event. She said she was willing to pay your bail if you agreed to have dinner with her." I couldn't help but laugh and assure her that, of course, there was zero chance of that happening. Her phone rang and she went to answer it with my office door open. "No, he was actually laughing about it." I heard her say, "I think so, Christine, but it seemed like an exercise in futility anyway. Good luck." She closed the door and went back to work. The next day the head of the department had a meeting with Mr. Johansson, and when we left, Christine was waiting in his reception area. "Paul, do you have a minute?" she asked. The other supervisors glanced at me, smiled and left. I let her haul and we left her father's office area and strolled down the corridor. "I hope you weren't too upset yesterday." "I thought it was funny," she said. I replied. She laughed. "I thought if I bailed you out, you might agree to have dinner with me so I could apologize again for my stupid comment." "No need to apologize again," I said. "In that case, will you still have dinner with me?" I stopped and looked at her and said firmly, "The answer is no." She met my gaze, "And that's the final answer, isn't it? You would never go out with me, would you?" "No, I won't. You have to understand that I can never be sure if you are trying to make up for what you said or if you really want to date me." We stood there in silence. She nodded and walked away. 3 months passed, during which time I only caught glimpses of Kristen as I walked around the building, and in the meantime I started dating Julie, the TV reporter. On our third date we became intimate, and after that we saw each other 2 or 3 times a week, but it was strictly a physical relationship. Christmas was approaching and Mr. Johansson was throwing a party for the department heads. I overheard the Johnsons talking in the kitchen while I was in the bathroom. "She won't come downstairs as long as he's there. I told you not to invite him. Chris, Lucy, he's one of my right-hand men. He's greatly improved the performance of the planning department. How could I not invite him? Besides, I like him. Chris just screwed up, that's all. How many times have I told you, Fred, not to take that tone? I'm sorry, but your daughter's behavior has gotten him in trouble at least twice, and it's not surprising that he wants nothing to do with her." "I know, but she really cares about him. It's unfortunate, but I'm on his side." "But she's your daughter, can't you do something about it? If he doesn't date her, fire him for God's sake. Lucy, go and see to our guests." I rushed back into the living room, forgetting to go to the bathroom. I was chatting to another guest and his wife when the Johnsons came in. I barely made it through the party, glancing up the stairs once in a while to see if Christine would show up, but she didn't, and I had a few more dates with my fuck buddy Julie. After a few more dates and a few more intimate encounters, I found myself thinking about Christine more and more. On Christmas Eve I was getting ready to leave to spend Christmas Eve with Tony, Sophia and Diana when I came out of the garage and another car pulled up in the driveway next to me. I stepped out of the car and it just so happened that Christine got out of the car as well and walked towards me. She spoke first. "What can I do to make you believe me?" We stood there in silence. "What can I do to prove that I don't mean what I say? I'm just a woman who likes men and wants men to like her." I look at her tearful face and realize that she doesn't need to do anything to convince me that she has you, that you can come with me to spend the evening with Tony and his family. She smiles. "Really, come on." I walked over to the passenger side of the car and opened the door for her, admiring her legs as she sat down. Kristen and I got lost in thought. Tony, Sophia and Diana knew each other well, but Tony and Sophia were surprised to see Kristen laughing, especially when Diana teased us about her excitement over the playhouse that opened up after Diana went to bed. The adults had drinks while assembling her toys on the way back. Kristen stayed on her side of the car when we arrived. We chatted until 2 a.m. I invited her to dinner the next day. I spent Christmas alone, but the next day Kristen joined me for dinner. We had dinner 3 times that week and spent New Year's Eve watching old movies together, eating popcorn, drinking Ice Flow root beer, and we kissed at midnight and it felt different, more hopeful. We spent most of our free time together over the next few weeks. Although I met her father twice during this time, we never spoke privately, but I did notice that he looked at me on Valentine's Day. The first time we made love was at my house. I decided to take the initiative and break her routine of always initiating. She had apologized many times before and made exaggerated gestures to win me back. We cuddled together on the couch, my right arm around her as she snuggled into my arms, one hand in my lap, my hand covering hers and the other on my knee. Without hesitation I undid the first button, followed by the second, third, fourth and fifth. She pulled her top out of her jeans and let it fall to the floor in agreement. If I thought that was fast enough, what happened next happened even faster. walking towards my bedroom, undressing as I went. My ex-wife was great, Julie on TV was great, Cynthia was excellent, but Kristen trumped them all. If her goal was to prove something or show me that she was truly sorry, she succeeded. The intimacy she brought to our relationship was more passionate than I could have ever imagined. She was passionately committed time and time again. That week, we insisted on having lunch either in her office or mine, but we kept intimacy out of the workplace. After that week of intimacy, I was called into her father's office. It seemed the rumor mill was back. He said, "Oh, what's the latest gossip?" "Paul, don't be ridiculous. Before I consider firing you, I'd like to know how long you intend this to last." "Last for what?" "Christine said something and you think you've forgiven her, but I'm not sure. I've seen the way you do business, and I don't want to see my daughter go astray." "Mr. Johansson, that's far from the truth. Christine is a wonderful woman, and as you know, my feelings for her are sincere. In fact, I think I may be in love with her." He was taken aback. "I didn't think you'd say that. Have you told her?" "No, sir. In fact, I didn't realize until this moment." He smiled. It was the first time I'd ever seen him give a genuine smile. Life is so funny sometimes. "Yes, sir, it does." "What next?" "I think I'll clean out my desk and see if there's any chance of getting in at Barnes, because you mentioned firing me," and he stopped smiling. "And why would you do that? Because you said before that you were considering firing me, and that was then, and this is now. Get back to work." I was on holiday with Christine that spring. We flew to Greece and took a boat trip around the islands. The Christmas after that, I asked her to marry me. 2 days later, we had dinner with her parents, and we've had dinner with them at least once a fortnight ever since. We welcomed their first grandchild 7 years ago and their second last year. We have no plans to add any more children to our family for the time being.